These 15 games were way ahead of their time, and honestly, it's a shame no one talks about them anymore. Kicking off our list is Beyond Two Souls, a cinematic narrative game that somehow faded into the background despite boasting A-list talent and jaw-dropping production values. Released in 2013 and starring Ellen Page and Willem Dafoe, this title was one of the boldest experiments in interactive storytelling. Quantic Dream set out to blur the line between film and gameplay, offering players a fragmented yet emotionally gripping story that spanned over a decade of the protagonist's life. But despite its ambition, critics were split, some praising its emotional depth, while others were frustrated by the non-linear narrative and limited player agency. What's often overlooked, though, is just how ahead of its time Beyond Two Souls really was. The dual character mechanic, where you control both Jodie and the ghostly entity Aiden, offered a fresh twist on gameplay, enabling players to approach situations in wildly different ways, and when you peel back the criticisms, you find a deeply human story about identity, loss, and the longing for freedom. Looking back now, it's almost criminal how little noise this game made compared to other narrative-driven titles. While games like The Last of Us rightfully earned praise for pushing the emotional boundaries of storytelling and gaming, Beyond Two Souls was quietly doing the same, just in a different, more experimental way. It didn't fit neatly into any one category, and maybe that's why it got lost in the shuffle. But make no mistake, it was a bold, beautiful, and deeply underrated experience that deserved way more hype than it ever got.
Keep your eyes on that door! Ah, shit, there's fucking loads of them!
Coming in at number 14 is GTFO, a game that practically dared people not to play it. Released in 2021 by 10 Chambers, this wasn't your typical co-op shooter. There was no hand-holding, no friendly UI, and definitely no room for lone wolves. Instead, GTFO dropped players into the cold, suffocating depths of an underground facility with a simple mission: survive. But surviving here wasn't just about shooting monsters, it was about whispering in voice chat while your team silently crouch-walked past sleeping horrors. What really sets it apart isn't just the fear factor, it's the intensity of the coordination it demands. There's this moment in nearly every level where the entire squad freezes staring at each other's glow sticks, everyone waiting for one guy to mess it all up. And when it goes wrong, and it will go wrong, it turns into sheer panic, but somehow still feels fair. However, like most of the games on this list, GTFO never got the mainstream recognition it earned, probably because it refuses to be friendly or because it demands actual communication in an age of ping wheels and a solo queue. But those who did stick around know the truth. GTFO is a masterclass in tension, design, and atmosphere. It's less a game and more a shared ordeal, one that forges camaraderie in the darkest places imaginable, and that's exactly why it deserved way more love than it ever got. Coming in hot at number 13 is Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, a game that did something no one expected from a Lord of the Rings spin-off. It actually redefined what open-world combat could look like. Released in 2014, this game introduced the groundbreaking Nemesis system, allowing enemies to remember you, grow stronger after surviving encounters, and even taunt you when they return for revenge. It was revolutionary, but strangely, it didn't spark the wave of imitators you'd expect from such a brilliant mechanic. Sure, it got decent reviews and made some year-end lists, but for a game that pushed innovation this hard, it should have made a much bigger splash. The combat borrowed the best elements of the Batman Arkham series and blended them with fluid swordplay and brutal executions, making every skirmish feel cinematic and personal. You weren't just mowing down generic orcs, you were building rivalries, shaping an ecosystem of enemies that reacted to your every move. Years later, it's baffling how few games adopted the Nemesis system or even tried to evolve it. Shadow of Mordor wasn't just a good game, it was a game changer, and yet it's rarely brought up in conversations about the greatest open world titles, which feels like a major oversight. It was ahead of its time, and it definitely deserved more love. Landing at number 12 is Sleeping Dogs, a gritty open-world crime drama set in a beautifully stylized version of Hong Kong. Initially dismissed as just another Grand Theft Auto clone, it quickly proved it had way more under the hood. You step into the shoes of Wei Shen, an undercover cop torn between loyalty to the badge and loyalty to his brothers in the Triads. That internal conflict, paired with visceral hand-to-hand combat and a surprisingly emotional narrative, sets Sleeping Dogs apart. Where most open-world games focus on gunplay and car chases, Sleeping Dogs gave you a martial arts system that made every fight feel like a scene out of a Jackie Chan movie. Combine that with fast-paced driving, deep customization, and authentic world building, and you had a game that checked every box. It even managed to mix in karaoke bars and noodle stands without feeling cheesy, just part of the game's unique flavor. But despite all its strengths, it never really found a large audience. Maybe it was the marketing, maybe it was bad timing, whatever the reason, it's one of those games that gets rediscovered years later by people who can't believe they missed out. And once they dive in, it's hard to put down. Sleeping Dogs should have been a franchise.
Taking you down!
At number 11, Mirror's Edge Catalyst tried to do the impossible by bringing lightning back to the same bottle that shocked the gaming world in 2008. Acting as both a reboot and a prequel, Catalyst expanded the world of Faith Connors, offering a bigger city, more fluid movement, and an open world design that let you chart your own path across the glass and steel skyline. It still had that signature aesthetic, but now everything was bigger, shinier, and far more ambitious. Where the original gave you small, linear parkour puzzles, Catalyst gave you an entire playground. This time around, Faith wasn't just dodging the system, she was actively rebelling against it. The story dove deeper into the surveillance state dystopia and her personal backstory, adding layers that the first game mostly danced around. The parkour? Still slick, still satisfying, but now enhanced with upgrades and a smoother flow system that made chaining moves even more exhilarating. It was a game about movement, control, and resisting a world that wants to keep you boxed in. But despite its ambition, Mirror's Edge Catalyst never truly landed with the impact it guaranteed. Critics found its story uneven, and some felt the open world lacked variety, but it still delivered something rare, a first-person game that prioritized grace over guns. In a genre obsessed with explosions and spectacle, Catalyst moved to a different beat, one that should have echoed a lot louder than it did. Smashing into number 10 is Prototype 2, a brutal, chaotic, superhero-style open-world game that leaned all the way into its madness. You played as James Heller, a soldier infected with the same virus that turned the original game's protagonist into a shape-shifting, city-destroying monster. That setup alone promises carnage, and Prototype 2 delivers on that promise in spades. This game gave you absurd powers, claws, tendrils, massive fists, body armor, and more. You could leap over buildings, consume enemies for health, hijack tanks, and unleash bio-attacks that turned entire streets into war zones. It was fast, it was violent, and most importantly, it was ridiculously fun. In a world where superhero games often feel stiff or limited, Prototype 2 made you feel unstoppable. But somehow it still slipped through the cracks. It released during a time flooded with big-name titles, and despite its improvements over the first game, it didn't get the credit it deserved. Maybe people weren't ready for its level of chaos, or maybe they just didn't know it was out. Either way, Prototype 2 is one of the most satisfying power fantasies in gaming, and one that never got its due.
On your ground! Go down, fight! You guys shooting? I can't tell!
At number 9 on our list is Bulletstorm Full Clip Edition, a remastered version of a game that was misunderstood from the start. This wasn't your average military shooter. Instead, it was a high-octane, foul-mouthed carnival of chaos where creativity and killing was the whole point. Developed by People Can Fly, Bulletstorm turned combat into a playground, giving you bonus points for stylishly eliminating enemies, using the environment, gravity boots, and an electric leash. It was like if Doom and Borderlands had a hyperactive baby raised on monster energy and sarcasm. What made it so addicting was how every encounter encouraged experimentation. You weren't just shooting to survive, you were shooting to show off, kicking enemies into spikes, flinging them into the air and blasting them mid-flight, or comboing multiple attacks for ridiculous point multipliers. It was arcade mayhem wrapped in a narrative that was surprisingly better than it had any right to be. And with the full clip edition, it all looked sharper, ran smoother, and even included Duke Nukem as a playable character just for laughs. Still, for all its bold style and and one-of-a-kind gameplay, it struggled to leave a mark on the larger gaming scene. Whether it was its offbeat tone or unfortunate timing, Bulletstorm slipped through the cracks, overlooked by countless players who would have likely had a blast with it. It's one of those games you come back to and think, why the hell wasn't this a hit? Landing at number 8, Sunset Overdrive is easily one of the most colorfully chaotic open-world games to ever hit consoles, and yet it's still criminally overlooked. Developed by Insomniac Games before they became Spider-Man royalty, this 2014 Xbox One exclusive turned post-apocalyptic destruction into a punk rock theme park. Mutated monsters, outrageous weapons, wall running, and rail-grinding movement made this feel like Jet Set Radio on acid, with a personality that screamed louder than its explosions. Underneath all the wild energy and fourth wall breaking humor was a shockingly tight gameplay loop. Movement was everything, and once you learned how to chain grinds, jumps, and wall runs together, the entire city became your playground. Combat rewarded style, not just accuracy, so the more absurd your approach, the more fun you had, and the arsenal, pure Insomniac chaos. From explosive teddy bears to vinyl record launchers, it was impossible not to smile while blowing things up. Unfortunately, it launched exclusively on a console that was struggling at the time, and it never got the spotlight it needed. Despite glowing reviews and a cult following, it just faded away, and that's a damn shame, because Sunset Overdrive was bursting with originality, fun, and personality in an era of overly serious shooters. Taking the 7th spot is GTA 4, a game that somehow became underrated simply because of how massive its name was. When it launched in 2008, it was praised as a masterpiece, a more grounded, gritty take on the GTA formula with one of the most immersive open worlds Rockstar had ever built. Liberty City felt alive in ways few games had ever accomplished, but over time, as the flashier, meme-filled GTA 5 took over the spotlight, this darker, more nuanced entry quietly slipped into the shadows. What GTA 4 brought to the table wasn't just violence and chaos, it was drama. Niko Bellic's story was haunting, wrapped in themes of the American dream, regret, and the weight of past choices. It asked bigger questions, leaned into character development, and wasn't afraid to slow things down for an emotional gut punch. Pair that with advanced physics, moody lighting, and a city that never stopped buzzing, and you had a world that felt real, messy, flawed, and full of life. And still, it's hardly ever mentioned when the greats are discussed. Most tend to highlight GTA 5's online chaos or the nostalgic charm of San Andreas, but GTA 4 deserves recognition for the strides it made in narrative depth and atmospheric realism. It was Rockstar at its most mature, and that's something that deserves more appreciation than it gets today. Coming in at number 6 is Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, a harrowing, intimate journey into the mind of a broken warrior. Developed by Ninja Theory, this game didn't rely on bombast or over-the-top set pieces. Instead, it pulled you in with whispered voices, hallucinations, and a hauntingly raw performance from Melina Juergens, who wasn't even a professional actor at the time. What made it special wasn't just the story, it was how that story felt. Senua's descent into the Norse underworld isn't just a physical journey, it's a psychological one, designed to make players feel her struggle with psychosis. The use of binaural audio made those inner voices disorienting and terrifying, while the minimalist HUD and cinematic presentation kept you immersed from start to finish. Combat was sparse but impactful, and every puzzle felt like a reflection of her fractured mind. Although it garnered widespread praise, Hellblade never truly reached a broad audience. Perhaps its heavy themes, brief length, or emotional weight were too much for the masses, yet for those who ventured into its world, the impact was undeniable. It demonstrated that games could be intimate, artistic, and deeply moving, qualities that deserved far more recognition than it ultimately got.
Do I look like a bloody anorak?
Crashing down at number 5 is Titanfall 2, the perfect example of a phenomenal game sabotaged by a terrible release window. Sandwiched between Call of Duty and Battlefield, it never stood a chance commercially, but critically, it was a beast. Its single-player campaign was an instant classic, featuring inventive levels like the time-traveling Effect and Cause, and the perfectly paced bond between pilot Jack Cooper and his Titan, BT-7274. Multiplayer wasn't just fast, it was elegant. Wall running, grappling hooks, and the ability to call down a giant mech made every match feel like a blockbuster action movie on speed, and yet despite everything it did right, it simply didn't sell well. EA basically sent it out to die. Today, Titanfall 2 is often cited as one of the best shooters of the decade, and rightly so, but that praise came too late. If it had launched at a better time, or gotten the marketing push it deserved, it could have been a franchise juggernaut. Instead, it's a buried gem that everyone loves after the fact. Taking the number 4 spot, Nier Automata is a game that quietly launched and then completely upended expectations. At first glance, it looked like a stylish action RPG with androids and robots, but beneath the flashy combat lay a deeply philosophical story about the meaning of life, consciousness, and the cyclical nature of war. Yoko Taro crafted something weird, wonderful, and utterly unforgettable. What sets it apart is how it plays with perspective, tone, and structure. You don't just play through the story once, you have to replay it multiple times, each time from a different character's point of view, unlocking deeper truths about the world. Combine that with a phenomenal soundtrack, a combat system refined by Platinum Games, and some of the boldest narrative choices ever made in a video game, and you get a title that transcends its genre. However, it wasn't an instant hit. It had to earn its cult status through word of mouth. Even now, some people still dismiss it as just another anime-style hack and slash, but those who played it know it's a masterpiece in disguise, and it absolutely deserved more love at launch. At number 3 on our list is Rise: Son of Rome, a launch title for the Xbox One that had everything going for it. Stunning visuals, cinematic storytelling, and brutal visceral combat, yet it was instantly written off as style over substance. That's a shame, because Rise delivered one of the most visually striking campaigns of the generation, set in a Roman Empire brought to life with meticulous detail. Sure, its gameplay leaned heavily into rhythm-based swordplay and QTEs, but the execution was slick, satisfying, and wrapped in a story filled with betrayal, vengeance, and honor. The cinematic direction was top tier, with sweeping camera angles and dramatic set pieces that rivaled any blockbuster film. It wasn't trying to be a 60-hour epic. It was focused, polished, and unapologetically bold. Time has been kind to Rise. While it didn't spawn a sequel, its influence can be felt in modern cinematic action games. It was a glimpse into what gaming could look like, and it arrived before players were ready to appreciate it. Claiming the second spot, Max Payne 3 is one of Rockstar's most overlooked titles, and that's saying something. Moving away from the noir-soaked streets of New York and into the neon-lit slums of Sao Paulo, it reimagined the series with a darker, more mature tone. Max was older, more broken, and more self-destructive than ever, but he was still a badass, and bullet time had never looked so good. The gunplay in Max Payne 3 was surgical. Every shot felt weighty, every dive cinematic, and every slow-mo headshot deeply satisfying. Rockstar poured everything into the presentation, dynamic cutscenes, a shifting narrative structure, and some of the most stylish shootouts in gaming. The soundtrack, especially during the airport finale, was legendary. Even with all its strengths, it faded into the background of Rockstar's vast portfolio. Caught between the towering successes of Red Dead Redemption and GTA 5, it failed to get the spotlight it truly deserved. However, for those who appreciate hard-hitting narratives and precise gameplay, Max Payne 3 remains a standout, still considered one of the finest third-person shooters ever created. And And finally, at number 1, we've got Assassin's Creed Syndicate, the most underappreciated entry in a franchise known for both highs and lows. Set in Victorian London, it featured dual protagonists, Jacob and Evie Fry, who brought drastically different vibes to the narrative. The setting was absolutely gorgeous, from the smog-choked streets to iconic landmarks like Big Ben, all rendered with historical precision. The gameplay introduced the rope launcher, which made scaling buildings feel faster and more fluid than ever before. Combat was tight, gang territory battles added a fresh layer of strategy, and Evie's stealth-focused missions added much-needed variety to the usual AC formula. It was stylish, polished, and arguably one of the most refined entries of the classic AC era. But it came right after Unity's disastrous launch, and players weren't ready to trust Ubisoft again. As a result, Syndicate was largely ignored, overshadowed by the sins of its predecessor. But if you go back now, you'll find a game that nailed its tone, characters, and world building better than most AC titles. It deserved redemption, not neglect, and it absolutely earned its spot at the top of this list.